Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. So let's cover them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a couple of very important announcements. Unacademy is providing a flat 50% off on all the subscriptions. You can now avail our subscription at just 19,999, and I'm told that this is a limited period offer. So basically you can avail the subscription at roughly 1067 rupees per month. So those interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the video description. And don't forget to enter the code IAS English. On the subscription page, you might see a different price. To avail the discounted offer, you need to enter the code IAS English. The second important announcement. As part of Conquer Prelims, we have been conducting these one-shot marathons so that you can quickly revise the static portion of your syllabus. So today, Sham sir would be taking up a marathon session for Indian economy. He'll be covering key topics like financial markets, agriculture, industries, infrastructure models, employment, etc. Lot of questions have come from this segment in previous question papers. So don't forget to attend this session live today at 4 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. So with this, let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 12, the Hindu has published a very detailed and insightful article on the aspects of international law in the context of the ongoing Iran war. I feel this is a great article which can easily help you understand the aspects of international law that governs conflict, that deals with armed conflict. So be it the triggering of a war and how a war should actually be conducted. What are the rules governing this? So that is something we need to understand. So I think this article provides a great insight into it, but I would like to go beyond the article, go a little deep into this topic so that we can cover every single detail about this topic. Because given the kind of instability around the world and the number of active conflicts around the world, you can definitely expect a mains or even a prelims question related to international humanitarian law or the rules-based order under the international principles, including UN Charter and the Rome Statute. So these are the key topics that we'll be covering under this article. Now, as part of the ongoing war in Iran, there was one very disturbing development, something which affected me personally as well. On the very first day of the conflict, on 28th Feb, when US-Israel launched these deadly strikes against Iran, there was a school building which was struck in the city of Minab. According to verified reports, it has been confirmed that this particular school was a girls' school and more than 150 civilians have been killed in this particular attack. According to verifiable sources, up to 150 to 160 school girls were killed in this deadly attack. Now, this is something which would shake any person, any individual, because any such strike goes against the very core tenets of humanity. So, was this a deliberate strike or was it accidental? Was it collateral damage? What does international law say about this? That is something we will explore in today's discussion. Now, first, let's talk about the legality of the war against Iran itself. Is the American and Israeli aggression against Iran justified under international law? On what basis are US and Israel justifying their actions against Iran? That is something we'll first understand as to the start of the conflict. What is the international law governing the aspect of aggression, which essentially results in an armed conflict? So then we will look at international humanitarian law, which defines the code of conduct during wars and conflicts. So when you look at the American and Israeli military action against Iran, they have justified this as preemptive action. They have stated that Iran was posing an imminent threat to both the countries, which means Iran was on the verge of launching major attacks on US and Israel using deadly weapons, according to the claims made by US and Israel. Using this as a basis. They're using the self-proclaimed imminent threat as a legal basis to state that their military aggression is essentially a preemptive strike to prevent the Iranian attack on them. So they are saying that this is preemptive self-defense. They're not saying this is an act of aggression. It's not an act of unilateral aggression according to US and Israel. They're saying it's a preemptive act of self-defense because according to them there was a perceived imminent threat based on their assessments of Iran. Now let's dissect this and break it down. Now, when you look at the UN Charter, the UN Charter was designed in 1945 to exactly prevent these kind of scenarios and prevent the current wars and conflicts that are raging around us. It was conceptualized in a post-World War environment to prevent the scourge of war. Because back then the world had finally realized, understood the kind of humanitarian damage that wars can cause. So, under the UN Charter, one of the primary goals, the building blocks of the UN, was to maintain international peace and security, to prevent wars and armed conflict, and also focus on humanitarian laws to deal with refugees, to deal with disasters, and also to rebuild and reconstruct the world which had been destroyed by the two world wars. This was the whole philosophy of establishing the UN through the UN Charter. So, under the UN Charter, the use of force against a sovereign state is explicitly prohibited. Under Article 2, Clause 4, use of force against any sovereign state or even the threat to use force against another sovereign state. This is explicitly prohibited under Article 2, Clause 4. Threatening the political independence of a sovereign state or using armed aggression, military force to violate the territorial integrity and sovereignty of another state is clearly prohibited under the UN Charter under Article 2, Clause 4. However, use of force can be allowed only under two circumstances under international law. What are these two circumstances? One, use of force if it is authorized by the UN Security Council, then it is legal. If UNSC determines that there is a certain rogue state, a rogue actor, which is acting against the interests of international peace and security, which is violating international law blatantly and causing human rights violations. In such a scenario, the UNSC, which consists of 15 members, the 5 permanent members and the 10 non-permanent members, they can authorize the use of force, where an international coalition force can even invade a country and topple that government if necessary to protect international peace and security. For example, this principle was invoked in 2001 when US-led NATO coalition forces invaded Afghanistan to topple the Taliban regime after the 9/11 attacks. So such use of force can be authorized by the UN Security Council. But however, this power is largely controlled by the P5 countries because the 5 permanent members of UNSC have the veto right. US, Russia, China, UK and France, the 5 permanent members, they can exercise the veto. So this power has often been misused as well for geopolitical reasons by the 5 permanent members. But this remains one of the legal routes through which armed aggression can be carried out against another state, a rogue state, which is threatening international peace and security. Then the second route is an exception that is provided under the UN Charter. What is this exception? It's contained under Article 51, where a country can exercise the right to self-defense. You can defend your country. You can act in self-defense and go to war. But what is the condition? The condition is that there has to be an armed attack against you. If there is another country attacking you, only then you can act in self-defense. You can't invoke self-defense based on presumptions, based on future threats which have not yet happened. So Article 51 provides for the right to self-defense only in the eventuality of an armed attack. Like, let's say, for example, Pakistan attacks India. So Pakistan is the aggressor. Now India can invoke Article 51, exercise the right to self-defense, and go to war against Pakistan. This would be justified under international law. But you can't say that there is a future threat that we are anticipating and give lame excuses and go to war against a countries and claim the right to self-defense. That's the cruel irony of today's world order, where the aggressors are claiming the right to self-defense. This defies all logic, all rationality. So, what is the basis on which US and Israel have gone to war? The basis is that Iran was posing an imminent threat. In their assumption, based on their intelligence assessments, they perceive Iran as an immediate threat. See, there is no doubt that Iran is a hostile rival to Israel and United States, right? And it's a mutual feeling that they have shared. So there's a very complex, deep-rooted history behind it as to why Iran hates US so much, why US has hatred towards Iran, and same with regard to Iran and Israel, right? It's all related to the Palestinian conflict and the Iranian revolution and how US had meddled, interfered in Iran, installing a puppet regime under the previous Shah, Reza Pahlavi. So there's a very deep-rooted, complex history behind it that explains the rivalry, the hostility, the kind of aggression between these powers. So now, US and Israel, their main concern was Iran's nuclear program, which of course would pose a serious threat as Iran has often called for death to America, death to Israel. So Iran possessing nuclear weapons would definitely be considered as a serious threat, an imminent threat. But however, Iran was nowhere close to acquiring a nuclear bomb. See, this is a bogey that US Israel have been telling the world since 1990s. If you go back and look at the congressional records and the statements Israeli leaders have delivered to United Nations, particularly Netanyahu, or the assessments of the US security establishment, they have been predicting that Iran would acquire a nuclear bomb in few weeks, in few months, and they're doing it from 30 years. Yes, Iran has pursued nuclear weapons, there's no doubt about it. But however, Iran's capacity to actually produce a nuclear bomb has been severely degraded by US and Israel themselves through their targeted assassinations of Iranian scientists and generals, through cyber warfare operations and sabotage, through economic sanctions. And last year, in 2025, US Israel launched major strikes on nuclear installations of Iran, and they themselves claimed that the attack was very successful, that they caused significant damage to Iranian nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo, which are actually hidden underground and under mountainous structures. So, if Iran's program was actually crippled, if it was set back, then what's the logic of this imminent threat? Then, more importantly, Iran was actually willing to negotiate. The Geneva talks were going on between US and Iran till 27th of Feb. It was mediated by Oman. Oman's foreign minister even said on 27th Feb that we are almost arriving at a deal, that Iran has agreed to stop all its enrichment and hand over the stockpile. So Oman's foreign minister went on public record stating that a deal is within reach. Very soon a deal would be finalized. And then immediately what happens? The next day, US Israel attack Iran. So it appears as if Israel doesn't want the deal to happen, or even US is not too keen on having a deal with Iran. Because see, if the purpose was to prevent a nuclear Iran, prevent that imminent threat from Iran, and if a deal was on the table, right, if Iran was agreeing to stop all its enrichment, hand over the stockpiles, and ensure international inspections are allowed, where IAEA inspectors can inspect the facilities, then it could have prevented the entire war and the entire human suffering that comes along with it. So this is where the logic of anticipatory self-defense or preemptive self-defense falls apart. See, this falls into a legal gray area. Experts, right, they consider this to be a legal gray area when countries invoke the right to anticipatory self-defense. There should be some conditions met, some conditions satisfied, even if you're invoking the right to anticipatory self-defense. For example, had Iranian leaders directly threatened and decided to attack US or Israel? That's condition number one. If you look at the statements of Iranian leaders over the past 1 year or even over the past 2 to 3 years, they had been striking the conciliatory note, showing the willingness to talk. Of course, they would issue rhetorical statements and threats, but it was usually after US and Israel had threatened them. That was primarily rhetoric, but it was well known even in European capitals that Iranian leaders were looking for a way out, a off ramp, where they could avoid the tensions and the escalation and the conflict and work out a deal with US and Israel. The second important condition is that did Iran really have the capability to attack these countries? See, Iran can definitely cause significant damage in the immediate neighborhood, in West Asia and the region around it, particularly Israel and the GCC countries, the Arab states. Iran has sufficient firepower, as you have been witnessing. It has plenty of short range, medium range ballistic missiles, hypersonic vehicles, drones, which can cause significant damage. Plus, Iran has been using a lot of terror proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, Kataib Hezbollah, and the others. So, definitely, Iran has been posing a security threat across the region, but it poses no threat to the United States. It has no capability to strike homeland US or mainland US. Though Trump has claimed Iran was building a ICBM or an intercontinental ballistic missile, there's no evidence to prove that. So US and Israel have not provided enough justification, enough reasoning, and enough justification to essentially justify this war. So if at all force has to be used, right? Another important condition is you must have exhausted all the other options. War should be the last resort. So if diplomacy was working, if the talks were making progress, and if Iran's nuclear capabilities had been degraded, and if Iran was showing the willingness to talk, then there is no justification for use of force under international law. Right? So, this is something you need to clearly understand. Now, coming to the conduct during war, the code of conduct. What can be targeted? What cannot be targeted? What is considered as a war crime? This is something which is defined under four separate conventions, which are collectively known as the Four Geneva Conventions of 1949. Now, please pay attention. What we are discussing is very, very important. Under the Four Geneva Conventions, the code of war is defined. The code of conduct during armed conflict is defined. So these four Geneva Conventions are collectively also referred to as International Humanitarian Law, or IHL. So international humanitarian law is basically a reference to the four Geneva Conventions. Now, when you look at war ethics and morality during times of war, this goes back to even ancient times. You look at all the ancient great civilizations, from Indian civilization to the Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, right? Throughout history, throughout ancient medieval times, there have been a set of codes, moral codes, ethical codes, which are expected to be followed and upheld. For example, you will not target the sick and the wounded, right? You will not target women, old age people, children. These are some basic codes that humans have been following from age old times. But as they say, everything becomes fair in love and war. In most cases, these morals, these ethics, the principles, the values are violated, which results in these gross violations. When you look at Geneva Conventions, Convention number 1, it specifically deals with combatants who are injured, who become sick, meaning they are no longer able to fight. See, in any war, combatants are legitimate military targets, right? Let's say two countries, A and B, are fighting a war. So the military of one country can target the combatants of the other country. And the other nation can target the military sites and the military assets of the other nation. So targeting combatants and military assets, military sites, command control centers, this is considered as fair game in a war. But what if the soldiers become incapacitated? They are sick or they are wounded, they have lost their limbs, they can't fight anymore. So such combatants who are no longer involved in active combat, they can't be targeted, they can't be killed. Is that clear? The sick and wounded members of armed forces who are still in the battlefield, if they are completely incapacitated, you can't go and kill them. This is against international humanitarian law. It can be labeled as a war crime. Clear? Then Geneva Convention number 2. It specifically deals with combatants who are shipwrecked. It specifically focuses on naval warfare. If, let's say, a ship is struck at the sea and the ship is completely immobilized and the sailors are no longer in a position to fight the war, so such members of armed forces cannot be killed. They can't be targeted deliberately, right? You can arrest them, you can detain them, but you can't kill them. So this provides a certain degree of protection for shipwrecked sailors and combatants. Then Geneva Convention number 3. It exclusively deals with POWs, prisoners of war. When you capture enemy combatants who are enemy of the state, how do you treat them? Right? You can't humiliate them, you can't torture them, and you need to provide basic dignity, basic respect, and secure their basic rights. Provide them medical care, food, shelter. Of course, you can try them under your laws, but the basic rights can't be violated. So this deals with the rights of the POWs or prisoners of war. Then Geneva Convention number 4 deals with civilians. Civilians including women, children, non-combatants, right, who are not direct participants in the conflict. It prohibits the attack on civilian installations and targets. You can't blindly bomb civilian neighborhoods. You can't target a residential building. You can't target schools, educational institutions, hospitals. Any such attack will be labeled as a war crime. So, this is what international humanitarian law is all about. So, we have jus ad bellum, which is your UN charter that addresses the legality of starting a war, triggering a conflict. Article 2, Article 51 of UN charter, they deal with jus ad bellum, which is your legality of starting the conflict. But once a war has started, then your international humanitarian law kicks into action, jus in bello, which ensures humane conduct. So this international humanitarian law is codified under the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. This again was an outcome of the Second World War, the First and Second World War. Now, under the international humanitarian law, there are 4 core principles which can't be violated. This includes the principle of distinction. What do you mean by this? It means you have to distinguish between civilian and military targets. When you're fighting a war, you need to put every effort possible to identify whether the target is civilian or military. You have to make a clear distinction between the combatants and the non-combatants. Then proportionality. What do you mean by proportionality? The extent of force that you're using should be proportional to the threat that you're facing. Let's say there is just one armed enemy combatant, right? You can take out that one individual soldier through various other methods, maybe through using a sniper or a very precision strike, right? You need not go and bomb that entire neighborhood just to kill one soldier who might be active in that area. So proportionality in the use of force, which should correspond and it should be commensurate to the level of threat that you're facing. You can't use disproportionate force. Let's say there are few radical elements holding rifles and guns and firing at you. You can't go and bomb the entire area. That's completely disproportionate. So the use of force has to be proportionate. And any attack should have a military necessity. The military commanders and the leadership, the decision makers, they have to exercise a lot of caution to ensure that each and every attack is based purely on military necessity. You can't blindly go and target any civilian infrastructure and facility. You can't simply go and bomb dams or power plants or, let's say, cities which have nothing to do with this war. So there should be a clear military objective which you need to achieve. Let's say there is an enemy position which is launching rockets and missiles at you. That becomes a legitimate target. It's a military necessity to wipe it out. So you can hit those targets. You can't go behind other soft targets just because you can. This is also prohibited under international humanitarian law. Then comes precaution. where decision makers and military commanders have to exercise utmost precaution to use minimal force to first identify whether the target is civilian or military and ensure the force you're using is proportionate, ensure there is a military necessity for the attack. So that precaution has to be ensured. And if at all there is collateral damage which is anticipated, you need to find ways to minimize that collateral damage. That is the unfortunate truth of any conflict, right? There will be collateral damage. So you need to put in place measures through precaution to ensure that the extent of damage to civilians and non-combatants and wounded combatants is as limited as possible. So coming back to the attack on the school in Menab, where 150 plus schoolgirls have been killed, this is a gross violation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Convention on Rights of the Child guarantees the basic protection and rights to children, especially children who are facing an armed conflict. States can't blatantly kill them. Even if it's collateral damage, they will be accountable under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Then you have the Rome Statute that established the International Criminal Court, and it defines any intentional targeting of civilians, educational institutions, hospitals as a war crime. So, if let's say US, which allegedly was responsible for the strike on the girls' school, if at all it is dragged to the ICC, though it's not a member of ICC, it's not party to a Rome Statute, it has not ratified it. But still, US can be held accountable for this particular war crime where 150 plus school girls have been killed. As an educational institution, a school has been bombed. Now, let's be fair to the US and look at the other side of the argument. There has been some confirmation coming from the American side as to why the school building was hit. According to the Americans, this was not intentional. Their intent was not to hit the school building. So then what happened? How did such a massive bomb strike this school building? Right? US forces, their intelligence, they of course knew that there is a school located. So they were not aiming at the school according to what US officials have been briefing anonymously. Their target was a IRGC facility that was located in close proximity to the school. Now, what does international law say about this? What if there is a military target next to a civilian target? Let's say there is a hospital, there's a school building located, and maybe the other side is deliberately using these facilities as a human shield, like how Hamas has been doing in Gaza. Hamas is known to use hospitals and schools and use them as command centers. So they are actually military targets in that way. So what does international law say in this regard? Let's examine this. See, if let's say a combatant is using a civilian facility like a school or a hospital, let's say you have provable evidence, intelligence, that the combatant forces are turning civilian facilities into command centers where weapons are being stored, decisions are being made, communication nodes are being set up, then these facilities can become legitimate military targets under international law, right? But the burden of proving this is on the aggressor, the country which is attacking. They need to establish that the facility was being used as a military facility. But even in this case, the four core principles have to be followed. The principle of distinction, identifying civilians from combatants, using proportionate force, not using excessive disproportionate force, and ensuring that the attack is a military necessity and exercising utmost precaution so that minimal damage is caused to combatants, minimal collateral damage is ensured. Now, as per what US side has been claiming anonymously, it was not an intentional attack on the school. They were targeting a IRGC facility nearby. But the extent of the damage caused and the proximity of the explosion is what led to the significant damage of the school building. This means that US military commanders, they did not exercise the four core principles. Right? They failed to distinguish between civilian and military combatants. If they knew that civilians are located, that two children are located nearby, they should have used minimal force. They could have used a different type of precision bomb, which limits the damage. They could have chosen a different timing. kind of weapon and the time would have been critical, right? Instead of attacking this facility in daytime, because this happened on the first day of the war when normal life was continuing in Iran. Nobody had anticipated the strikes immediately, right? Maybe they could have avoided this target for the time being, since they knew that there is a school building located, there are children located right next to it. So, to avoid the damage, they could have pushed it by a day or two and then targeted only the IRGC facility, which would have been a legitimate military target. But did the US do that? No. No caution was exercised. They used disproportionate force. They're not able to justify the military necessity, and they didn't even distinguish between civilians and combatants. That is where these rules and laws get easily violated and broken, right? So, this is what we can understand. Now, coming to my last point for this topic, does this mean international law has become useless? Is international law completely outdated and irrelevant? Is there no point in following international rules? So, this is a question I would leave it to you, because we have discussed this many times in recent classes and have added this screenshot here, which will give you the required information. So, I want you to take this up as an exercise. Please go through this and let me know what's your view in the comments. Is international rules based order completely dead and irrelevant? Should we discard it? Should we stop following it entirely? Or is there some relevance even today? It may not be perfect, right? We know the existing institutions like UN are ineffective and they are almost useless. But does it mean you abandon the institutions, abandon whatever rules you have? Because most of them can't be enforced, especially big powers like US, Israel, and others, they get away. Same with Russia. Russia has gotten away with all its violations against Ukraine. So, what is your view on this? Should we completely abandon international rules? Let each country decide what's best for themselves. Or is there some relevance for international law even today? Though the world is in chaos, does the international rule-based system, does it have any relevance? Please let me know in the comments. Now, coming to the next discussion, there are plenty of articles in the newspaper that give us key updates on the Iran war. Now, I want to do this quite regularly because, see, this is honestly one of the most important geopolitical events of our lifetime. So, there are very, very big developments happening on a day-to-day basis. There's so much confusion, chaos, and there's a flood of overload of information, a lot of fake news and misinformation as well. So, I think regularly you need to be updated as to what's happening. So, a quick update on some of the key developments in the ongoing war, and then we'll quickly move on to the other topics. So, Iran has continued its massive attacks aimed at US interests, Israeli interests, and the neighboring Arab states. Iran has been firing a barrage of missiles and drones, and though most of them are getting intercepted, some of them are finding their way to the target. Right? Iran has fine-tuned its ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and even its hypersonic systems. According to reports, there have been major strikes. For example, the petrochemical complex in Saudi Arabia, owned by Aramco, was hit by a major drone strike. Right? American military bases in Qatar, UAE have been hit. The French military base in UAE has been hit. Then, just yesterday, a petrochemical complex in Bahrain has been hit by an Iranian drone. There are also reports that big strikes have taken place in Israel, but we don't hear much about it because Israel has a very tight control on the information which is flowing out. Right? Israel has a complete ban on circulation of any videos and any reporting of the attacks and strikes. But according to reports, there have been some big strikes in Israel as well. And now the conflict is expanding very, very quickly. We are entering into very dangerous waters right now because on one hand, US sunk a Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean region near Sri Lanka. This itself has raised a lot of concerns for India. A lot of questions have come up against the Indian government, as the Indian government has not raised questions or condemned this particular incident. Of course, the Iranian ship was taken down in international waters in the exclusive economic zone of Sri Lanka, right? So India has no direct claim or a right to question this. But however, don't forget, Indian Ocean region is our strategic backyard. and no one messes with our strategic backyard without our knowledge, without our information. India believes that it is the leading net security provider of the Indian Ocean region. This is the whole philosophy of our Sagar Mahasagar doctrine. This is the core foreign policy approach of India since decades, to dominate the Indian Ocean and keep out external powers. If US submarines are blatantly entering these waters, launching attacks, sinking vessels of another country, it means they're expanding the war to Indian Ocean region. This could further destabilize the region, bring the war closer to India, and this increases the economic and strategic cost for India. So don't think this doesn't affect us. Don't think it happened in international waters and it's an issue that Sri Lanka has to deal with, not India. India has to deal with it because we are the predominant power in the region, not Sri Lanka. Right? India claims to be the most dominant power in this region. That's why it's very important for India to look at what happened. Right? Was India able to detect the submarine? Or did the Americans give prior warning to India? And if not, then India would be justified to question the US, raise a diplomatic protest. And if you don't do it, if you remain silent out of the fear of affecting ties with US, then this would be a big compromise on your strategic autonomy, a big compromise on your foreign policy. And this could undermine India's image, India's influence in the critical Indian Ocean region. That is something India can't afford. Then Iran has blatantly expanded the conflict. It has started targeting Azerbaijan, Greece, and Turkey and Cyprus. So don't think the war is now limited just to the Gulf region, right? It has expanded very soon. Drone strikes were reported in Azerbaijan. Iran has attempted strikes on Greece, Turkey, Cyprus. Some were direct strikes carried out by the Iranian forces and IRGC. Some were carried out by Hezbollah. Most of them have been intercepted, but the drone in Azerbaijan struck the target. So this has already dragged the NATO air defense into action. In Turkey, Turkey is a NATO member. NATO air defenses have been active. Then Britain has an air base in Cyprus, which has been activated. And this is what is pushing the European powers and other American allies, Western allies, to support US and Israel. And they are also looking to enter the conflict. From Europe, we have Germany, France, Italy, now even UK, which has allowed US to use the British military bases in the Europe region, even in the Indian Ocean, the Diego Garcia base, which belongs to Mauritius actually. Right? So Germany, France have already deployed their assets. France has even diverted a nuclear powered aircraft carrier to protect its interests. Canada and Australia have also shown similar signs. Though they have not joined the war officially, they are showing similar interest and they're looking to join the conflict if required. So this is acquiring dangerous proportions. The conflict is spreading to new countries. And this is exactly the recipe for a bigger global conflict. Right? So given the sinking of the Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean, the small countries which are neighbors of India, they have been shocked, they have been alarmed. Sri Lanka has been deeply concerned, Maldives has been worried. This is where India should be showing leadership. We need to reassure the smaller neighbors and take the ownership of defending our backyard and keeping out such external interference. Yes, this war is between them. We should not get directly involved and meddle with it. But if they extend this into our backyard, that is where I think India should be drawing a red line. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. And that's what the editorial is also dealing with. Right? It's calling upon all the countries that they should de-escalate immediately, because the economic, the human, and the strategic consequences are severe. It can cause irreparable damage, which could plunge the entire region and the world into decades of conflict. Because this could create so much hate and resentment that it could breed a new age of radicalism and terrorism. And even the US, right? It's hardly prepared for a prolonged, sustained conflict. Right? It shows that the Trump administration did not have defined political goals when they launched the war. But again, you don't expect someone like Trump to be a rational actor, right? But now, when you look at the kind of Iranian response, because see, for Iran, it's do or die. It's about survival. And they would do anything to ensure that they go down by putting up a fight. Though US Israel clearly have military dominance and aerial superiority, they can't engineer a regime change only through aerial dominance. It has never happened in history, right? You can't change and topple regimes just through air dominance. It's impossible to do it, right? Near impossible to do it. So unless and until US is prepared for a ground invasion, which itself is a very risky affair. So it could be like Afghanistan 2.0, Vietnam 2.0, or Libya or Iraq 2.0. So US has made many such mistakes, and it has led to very serious human right violations in the past. Lakhs, millions have been killed. And one should hope that better sense would prevail on these leaders. The other concern is the US, which is now desperate, right? It wants to engineer a regime change as soon as possible. And they have started realizing that if they continue to fight the air war, they won't be able to sustain it. Because right now they are using up multiple interceptor missiles to shoot down cheap Iranian missiles and drones. According to reports, US has already spent more than 11 to 12 billion dollars in the first 5 days of conflict. So war is always about money, right? The cost will not justify it. And it's also about the industrial complex. The industry can't replace the weapon system so quickly. They've started exhausting their Patriot and THAAD missile defense systems. And it's the same system used by all the other countries as well, from Qatar to UAE to Saudi Arabia to Israel. They all use American weapon systems. So since they are firing multiple interceptors to take down cheap Iranian missiles and drones, there is a clear cost asymmetry. Right? Iran is using $5,000, $20,000, $30,000 weapons, whereas the others are firing multi-million dollar systems. And you can't sustain this for more than few days, not more than 3-4 weeks. So can the US and Western military industrial complex, can they replace them? Can they step up their production? Only then they can sustain the war. If not, US will look at other desperate measures. So there are reports that the CIA is looking to instigate a rebellion by sponsoring Kurdish militia against Iran. Now, this is a very, very dangerous game the US is playing. They have done this before and they have almost destroyed this region. Because, see, in the same region, in the Iraq, Syria, Iran belt, they had worked with Kurdish forces, they had worked with even factions of Al Qaeda called Al Nusra Front, and they ended up backing radical extremist forces just so that they could topple Bashar al Assad's regime. But in the process, they created a political vacuum. They triggered sectarian conflict between Shias and Sunnis, which eventually created a fertile ground for even more radical forces to emerge. And that is how your ISIS was born. That's how Islamic State rose to prominence in the political vacuum that Americans had created by meddling with the Iraq Syria region, by working with radical extremist forces, including factions of Al Qaeda such as Al Nusra Front. Now they are sponsoring Kurdish militia in Iraq, mobilizing them, using them to trigger a rebellion and an internal attack on Iran. Now, this is very dangerous. See, the Kurds are spread out across the region. Kurds are found in Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, and as well as Iran. Right? Kurdish militias have been leading an insurgent war against Turkey for many decades. But now Turkey has been able to crush Kurdish militias like the PKK. So PKK has surrendered in Turkey. In Syria as well, the new regime which has come up, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham under Ahmad al-Shara, they have been able to crush the Kurdish militias such as YPG. They previously enjoyed their own autonomy in Syria under Bashar al-Assad. But since Assad was toppled, Kurdish autonomy has been taken away by the new Syrian regime. And there has been recent fighting between Syrian forces and the Kurdish militia. So Kurds are losing ground in Turkey and Syria. Their movement is almost coming to an end. Now, if the Americans were to sponsor Kurdish militias in Iraq and the Syria region, use them for their geopolitical selfish agendas in Iran, it will only perpetuate the conflict, resulting in a bigger escalation, a wider escalation. There are already reports the CIA is pumping arms, weapons, and massive amounts of money and intelligence support to Kurdish militias to quickly use them and mobilize them against Iran. So this is a very dangerous game which can quickly go out of hand. Now, coming to India's position, see, India was surprisingly silent on the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, right? And almost 6 days later, India has offered condolences. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri visited the Iranian embassy in Delhi and has signed the condolence book and expressed India's concern about the killing of the Iranian leader. This again is a very complex topic. I'm planning to do a separate video on it. So let's cover this through a separate discussion. Like, what is India's position with regard to Iran? Is India truly neutral in the conflict? Or is there a slight tilt in favor of US and Israel and UAE, which is evident? Have we abandoned our friendship with Iran? Because Iran has been a key partner, don't forget. Though Iran has been problematic sometimes, but that was largely because India would follow American sanctions post 2018. But Iran in general has been a great strategic partner to counter terrorism, to counter Pakistan, to counter the Taliban in Afghanistan in 1990s, and as well as for connectivity for Central Asia and Afghanistan. Iran has been very crucial. We have been great partners before, despite some of our differences. Yes, Ayatollah Khamenei had expressed controversial statements about Kashmir and even supported Pakistan at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, creating a complexity in the relationship. But despite that, Iran remained a key strategic partner for India. Yes, there were differences, right? There were mistakes done by both the sides. But as I said, Iran remained a key partner. So for now, India not to express condolences, delayed by so many days, and not to condemn the attack itself. India has just called upon all of them to respect sovereignty, and India has expressed more sympathy with US and UAE and Israel, and the same is not seen on the Iranian side. So this is something which could probably alter the very course of Indian foreign policy, and we need to assess and evaluate how this will play out in the coming days. Now, coming to the economic impact, there are multiple articles in today's paper. India is looking to secure some of its oil and energy supplies because see, Hormuz Strait has been blockaded by Iran, though US is attempting to clear the blockade, right? The shipping traffic has been completely disrupted. Even the movement of cargo vessels has been completely disrupted. So energy supplies is definitely a big concern for India. So India is looking to work with US to focus on insurance through the IDFC, the International Development Finance Corporation, which is essentially a development institution sponsored by the US government. The US government sponsors the IDFC, International Development Finance Corporation, through which India has secured insurance for energy supplies. So we're looking to utilize this in case of energy disruptions. We're also in touch with the International Energy Agency that's based out of Paris to deal with any disruption to energy flows. One main concern for us right now is not crude oil actually, because we have enough supplies to last at least few weeks to few months. Indian refiners have at least 24 to 26 days of supplies. Our strategic petroleum reserves, Indian strategic petroleum reserves can also last several weeks. So at least 60 to 70 days of supplies is guaranteed. So that's not a concern for India. We can even quickly diversify. And just yesterday, there have been reports. US has given a waiver to India to continue buying Russian oil, given the disruption happening in West Asia, which means we can quickly diversify and source oil from others. So crude oil is not going to be a big concern for us. The bigger concern is natural gas. LNG is the biggest concern because Qatar, which is the world's major producer and exporter, on which India has a critical dependency, has completely stopped gas production. So this is something which can significantly hit gas supplies to India. And that is where India is really, really worried. Next, the economic impact across sectors and industries. The pharma industry is estimating losses to the tune of 5,000 crores. Why? Because Africa and West Asia region, they are critical markets for India's pharma exports. A large part of our pharma exports are headed towards West Asia, North Africa, and the rest of the region. So the disruption happening here because of the conflict could result in significant losses for Indian pharma. Then coming to agriculture sector, this is where the real fear is for India right now. The perishable goods is something which will immediately take a hit. India was one of the key suppliers of perishable fruits, vegetables, dairy products, meat, etc. They were usually transported through flights. And now, because of all the flight cancellations and supply disruptions, we are looking at complete wastage of the perishable goods that are stored in warehouses and cold storage facilities in India. You can't immediately create a demand for it. So this will result in immediate losses for Indian traders and Indian farmers. Then another concern is about basmati rice. 60,000 tons of basmati rice is stuck at various ports because, again, Africa and West Asia region accounts for almost 50% of our rice exports from India. This is one of the critical markets for our rice exports, particularly basmati rice, where there's a huge demand for Indian basmati. Right? Across the Gulf region, across Africa, North Africa, there's a huge demand for Indian basmati. So all the exports are now stuck because of the supply chain disruptions. So this is something India should anticipate. Now, coming to one last point, one last update. There's a great article today to understand Iran's political system, right? This will give you better insight into the Iranian regime. See, in Iran, there are two different branches of the government. There is one elected branch, directly elected branch, and there is a indirectly elected or unelected branch. So, if you look at Iran's setup, you have the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, right? The supreme leader is essentially a cleric, a Shia cleric. Supreme leader is not exactly directly elected by the people, right? Whereas the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, is chosen through a constitutional process, through a body known as the Assembly of Experts. There are 88 Shia clerics in this assembly, and they basically elect the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. Whereas the assembly itself, which comprises of these 88 Shia clerics, they are elected by the people. They are directly elected by the people of Iran. Clear? So there is one part of direct elections where the Shia clerics are elected to the Assembly of Experts, who in turn choose the Ayatollah. Now, coming to the Iranian government, this is the clergy side, which we discussed now. This was just the clergy, the theocracy side of the Iranian regime. So in Iranian regime, there is one theocratic side. Then you have the government on the other side. So when you look at the Majlis, which is nothing but the parliament, and the Iranian president and the entire cabinet, what happens here? The parliament has direct elections. So for the Majlis, direct elections are held where people will elect their representatives, right? The president and the ministers are largely chosen by the Ayatollah. And the Ayatollah also appoints key leaders to the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council is like one supreme authority, right? Which brings even the judiciary, the clergy, and the government together. The members of the Guardian Council are entirely chosen by the supreme leader, by the Ayatollah. So this is the complex political structure of Iran. And to understand any country, you need to have this insight. Now, moving on, let's look at a few other important articles. On page 11, there's a great article on the topic of hate speech. So let's break down this topic quickly. So what do you mean by hate speech? See, of late, Supreme Court of India has dealt with multiple cases related to hate speech. And Supreme Court had observed that it's becoming a political playground where one party accuses the other of using hate speech, especially during election time. During elections is when hate speech cases pile up in front of the Supreme Court. So in this article, there's an interview between legal experts, and they are expressing their views on hate speech in India and the legal provisions that are available to curb and curtail hate speech. So hate speech is essentially speech which is vitriolic, which is mainly used to target communities based on their religion, based on their ethnicity, based on their caste, based on their place of birth, probably. On these social lines, if someone is targeting members of another community, and particularly if there is an attempt to incite violence, this is often referred to as hate speech, which has criminal consequences, right? inciting mobs, inciting one community against the another. This is something which is the bread and butter of politicians across the world, not just in India. Most political parties capitalize on the social divisions, religious, communal divisions, ethnic, racial divisions, caste based divisions, etc. And they try to polarize the voters, polarize the society, the community. And in the process, they promote a lot of stereotypes, which results in discrimination against the community as well. Right? Now, most of the hate speech laws that are there in India, they only deal with incitement of violence. Criminal provisions are invoked only if hate speech has directly resulted in incitement of violence against another community. But what about the blatant stereotypes which are cultivated, especially in today's social media, where fake news, misinformation keeps circulating, which is aimed at certain specific communities, which leads to discrimination and silent oppression of various communities. See, generally, this is seen against minorities, religious, linguistic, ethnic, and caste minorities. But it could happen with the majority community as well. There is no such exception. But generally, it's something which you see against minorities. So the writers are examining whether our legal framework, judicial framework is sufficient to handle the threat posed by hate speech as it divides your society, breaks down the society itself. So recently, Assam's chief minister, Himanta Biswa Sharma, was accused of serious allegations that he was resorting to hate speech against Bengali Muslims, and cases were filed at the Supreme Court. But recently, Supreme Court has closed all these hate speech cases. It has asked the petitioners to go to the high courts, and accordingly, the case was sent back to the Guwahati High Court. So now the Guwahati High Court has issued a notice to the chief minister of Assam. So in that context, the writers and the experts are discussing about hate speech laws in India. So as I said, one limitation right now is that hate speech specifically invokes criminal provisions only if it has directly incited violence. If not, if it only leads to discrimination, silent oppression, and promotion of stereotypes and exclusion of that community, then there is no legal action, no consequence. That is one big flaw, one lacuna in the legal system. That's why the experts are suggesting that India should introduce the principle of constitutional tort. What do you mean by this? To understand this, you should understand what is a tort. Tort is a legal instrument that applies in case of a contract between two entities or two individuals. Let's say there is one individual A and a company B, and they have a contract between them. Okay. Now, the company B violates the terms of the contract, which causes financial loss to individual A, or it might cause some sort of harm to individual A, maybe reputational harm or maybe physical harm. So, if this breach of contract occurs under the principle of tort, if tort tools are used, then the company B, which was responsible for this loss and damage to individual A, will have to pay a compensation. When the terms of the contract is breached, causing loss and harm to the other party of the contract, the one who was responsible, the one who failed to prevent the breach of the contract, they will pay a compensation to the affected party. This is the principle of tort. Now, in constitutional court, basically, this is with the government and the citizens. The experts are suggesting that since government has a duty to protect citizens against hate speech, this is a contract in a constitutional democratic setup. We citizens have a contract with our government. What is the contract? The government will protect you. The government will protect all groups without any distinction, without any discrimination, and protect you against the impact of hate speech. Now, if there are violations here, if there is a breach, let's say the concerned institutions and authorities, the judiciary, they're not able to act and protect the citizens. If the constitutional tort is provided, then citizens can seek compensation directly from the government. This will establish accountability, right? It will impose a penal cost on the government. Maybe government is not the violator. Violator could be someone else. Let's say there is one politician, one a leader of a group who's using hate speech and resulting in violence or discrimination or exclusion of a community. It means the government is failing to act. If government doesn't provide justice to the affected individual or the group, then under constitutional tort principles, government will now owe compensation to the affected individuals. It's not about money, it's not about the financial component, it's about the principle. It establishes accountability and places that responsibility on the state to protect this basic right. That's why experts are suggesting that we should provide for tools such as constitutional tort, where citizens get compensated every time the government fails to act against hate speech. The Supreme Court in 2018 played a very big role to deal with mob violence and mob lynchings. In the Tehseen Poonawalla case, the Supreme Court issued clear directions to state governments to deal with mob violence, which many times was directly connected with hate speech and polarization in the society. But unfortunately, the directions are not being properly enforced or implemented. Even the Supreme Court has not been doing enough. Right? Supreme Court believes that such directions are enough. But Supreme Court has extraordinary powers under Article 142, which it can invoke to give directions to the authorities. But when you look at hate speech related cases reaching the Supreme Court's doorstep, Supreme Court is saying go back to the High Court. Supreme Court has even closed all the hate speech cases just last month in January, and it's asking the petitioners to go to the High Courts first. So experts believe that Supreme Court is essentially giving up that responsibility and role to protect the citizens from the impact of hate speech. Because see, hate speech need not always result in direct attacks or violence. Right? It could result in humiliation or subjugation of a community on the basis of their identity. It could result in the discrimination, exclusion of that community. It could result in the oppression of that community, stereotyping of that community. And right now, Indian legal system doesn't effectively cover that. When you look at elections, under the Representation of People Act 1950, Election Commission of India can actually take strict action against any politician, any party, which is resorting to hate speech for seeking votes. But however, in most instances, the Election Commission is found lacking in its action. It's not consistent, it's not uniform in its application. And there's a huge controversy and allegation against the Election Commission itself that it's not effectively tackling hate speech during elections. It's giving a free pass for certain leaders, and it's essentially not utilizing the authority provided under the RPA. Then when you look at some recent laws in this regard, in Karnataka, there is a bill which has been proposed, the Karnataka Hate Speech, Hate Crimes Prevention Bill. Though the intention is good to essentially target any form of hate speech, hate crime, hate violence, the problem is there are very broad provisions and there are no clear definitions as to what constitutes hate speech and hate crime. The thresholds have not been clearly established. So this will often result in the misuse of the law, right? So we need to wait and watch how this law would be implemented. And you need to then maybe implement a correction, a course correction through amendments. So the experts in this interview are suggesting that states consider such a law so that there is an effective tool which can be enforced. Right now, we have a lot of provisions under Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita and other related provisions, but they're not being effectively utilized. There are Supreme Court directions under Tehseen Poonawalla case for mob lynchings, right? Supreme Court can even suo motu intervene through Article 142. There are sufficient legal provisions under Representation of People Act, etc. But the writers and experts are suggesting states can consider their own laws like Karnataka, but however, it has to be well codified, well defined, with limited scope for discretion. And after implementing it for, let's say, 1 or 2 years, you need to look at the feedback, look at the effectiveness, and accordingly make a course correction through amendments to make the law effective. Ensure it is not misused and abused. At the same time, ensure it is used for protecting the communities which are being targeted through hate speech. So this is what we take away from this important article. So please take up the mains questions which are part of these topics. Now coming to the next article, The former Director General of the SSB, the Sashastra Seema Bal, Archana Ramasundram, a very well-known IPS officer, she has written this article to focus on women rights and gender justice in today's chaotic, conflict-driven world. See, today there are so many active conflicts going on, and generally women, children tend to be the most vulnerable to become victims of war-related violence. So very soon the world will be marking and celebrating International Women's Day, right, on the 8th of March. So on this occasion, we celebrate women achievers, right? We pay tribute to the women in our lives and we focus on gender related issues. So this day has a big history behind it. It goes back to the labor movement where people were fighting for labor rights back in the early 20th century. From there, it was eventually recognized by the United Nations in 1977. It was officially recognized by the UN. And now it's marked every year through the UN and its agencies and bodies. So for 2026 International Women's Day, there is a theme. Please make a note: rights, justice, action for all women and girls. This is the theme for this year's International Women's Day. But to secure the rights to all women and girls, to secure justice, and to ensure there is action on gender issues, the world needs to prioritize the ongoing conflicts and wars because women and girls and children are likely to become the biggest conflict, are likely to become the biggest victims in any conflict. And this is true throughout history. See, it's not that women are weak, right? But they tend to be vulnerable, particularly in patriarchal societies, in oppressed societies. Children, of course, because of their age, they would be prone and vulnerable. And if you look at the history of war and conflict since ancient times, quite often combatants and enemy forces they subjugate and target women and children. This is essentially a sort of weapon. They weaponize sexual violence and abuse, uh, carrying out mass rapes, sexual molestation and abuse and rape, and they turn it into a weapon of war, mainly to humiliate the enemy and to deliver a psychological blow to the enemy. For example, look at what the Japanese did to the Chinese in the 18th and 19th centuries, right? Or see what happened during world wars. So weaponization of rape is something which is very common in conflict zones. Plus women face the risk of severe emotional stress, limited access to basic food and nutrition, right? Pregnant women, if they don't have access to basic food and nutrition, it could threaten the pregnancy, threaten the infant, result in a lot of health related complications. And limited access or no access to education will affect the development of the child. So there are numerous challenges that will come up because of the raging conflicts today that the world is experiencing. That's why the writer is focused on this sensitive issue. See, back in 2000, the UN Security Council had adopted resolution number 1325 to focus on women, peace, and security. Many countries even adopted a national action plan based on this UNSC resolution, but however, most of it has not been properly implemented. There's no tangible outcome from resolution 1325. This resolution was meant to protect women from conflict zones, wars, etc., and make them stakeholders in peace resolution efforts and in the humanitarian efforts. Now, when you look at any ongoing war or conflict and the peace process which gets initiated, women get very limited or no representation. Even though they are one of the biggest stakeholders, one of the biggest victims of such conflicts, they are not often given any decision making roles in the mediation efforts, peacekeeping in the peacekeeping roles. And usually, peacekeeping efforts are entirely decided by the old men who themselves might have a sexist bias, right? Now, when you look at 2024, there were at least nine conflicts that were mediated. And in nine out of the 10 peace processes that were taken up, women had absolutely no role as negotiators. According to data that the writer has collected, women account for just 7% of negotiators in global conflicts and 14% of mediators. So, this basically ensures that women issues never get highlighted, right? And also, women are known to bring the aspect of empathy and focus on quick resolutions and multitask, but that entire advantage is being missed by the global community when the role of women as peacekeepers, negotiators, and mediators is completely ignored by the global community. See, right now, this is very much needed. Today, the world is facing the biggest threat possibly due to the ongoing wars and conflicts. According to UN reports, the world right now is experiencing the highest number of active conflicts since 1946. The last time the world experienced so many conflicts simultaneously was back in 1945 during Second World War. Though many big wars have taken place after that, we haven't seen so many simultaneous active conflicts occurring. And this places more women and children at the risk of harm, at the risk of abuse and exploitation. According to the UN Secretary General report on women, peace, and security, nearly 676 million women are located in conflict zones. They are located within 50 kilometers of active conflict areas that exposes them to greater risk of getting killed, getting tortured, kidnapped, being used as sex slaves, or being raped and abused as a weapon of war. And civilian casualties have increased 4 times since 1990s. Then sexual violence in conflict zones has jumped nearly 87%. These are the findings of the UN Secretary General report on women, peace, and security. So, on the account of International Women's Day, the writer is urging the global community to give greater role for women as part of the peacekeeping efforts, as part of the negotiations and mediations that are taking place to end these wars and conflicts. Right? Given how women are the biggest stakeholders in these conflicts and they can have a positive contribution as well. Right? The writer is urging the global community to recognize that role of women and utilize women mediators and negotiators more, give them a greater space, and ensure that women rights and children's rights are protected in war zones and conflict zones. Next, on page 16, there's an article related to a scientific study that focuses on metabolic diseases. What's a metabolic disease? Metabolic disease is basically related to abnormal digestion, absorption of nutrients, and the utilization of the energy that is produced through the food you're consuming. Any abnormal activity seen in your entire food cycle, right? Once you eat the food, how your body breaks it down, enzyme production which is needed to synthesize, break down complex proteins, carbs, etc. How the nutrients, micronutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream and the cells, and how eventually the energy is utilized by your body. This is your metabolic process. But today, mainly lifestyle related factors is resulting in metabolic diseases, primarily non-communicable diseases. There are different related metabolic diseases. They're all interconnected. They all influence one another. The first and most significant metabolic disease is your type 2 diabetes. Then you have your high systolic blood pressure, right? Then we also have high BMI, which is essentially obesity. Then fourth, we have high LDL cholesterol, low density cholesterol, which is extremely dangerous. And we also have a liver condition called MASLD, the metabolic dysfunction associated steatoid liver disease, which essentially leads to fatty liver and eventually liver cirrhosis. So these 5 conditions related to your metabolism, they are classified as metabolic diseases. They're all non-communicable diseases, primarily a result of poor lifestyle. Eating excess sugar, salt, fats, trans fats, a very sedentary, lethargic lifestyle with no or minimal exercise, right? And as well as poor nutrition is something which leads to these conditions, along with smoking, alcohol, etc. It's a combination of factors that causes the metabolic syndrome and leads to all these diseases, which are interrelated and they all influence one another. Today, this is becoming one of the biggest disease burden across the world. And a study conducted recently has established that in Asia Pacific region, India, China have the highest burden of metabolic diseases. The loss caused by metabolic diseases is measured in disability adjusted life years or DALYs. disability adjusted life years, like how many years of life is being lost. So India, China report the highest disability adjusted life years and high mortality occurring because of these metabolic conditions. So this is a wake up call, and India is all set to overtake China on most of the parameters. Right now, China is slightly ahead in some of the diseases, but India is expected very soon to go ahead of China as well, which increases the burden of these non communicable diseases. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the small articles in the paper. The union government has made big changes to the position of governors, and the President of India has appointed new governors across around 7 states and few union territories. Like, for example, the governor of Tamil Nadu, the controversial R.N. Ravi, former IPS officer, who was previously governor of Nagaland, has now been appointed as the governor of West Bengal. Then the incumbent governor of Kerala has been given additional charge as governor of Tamil Nadu. And such reshuffling has been done for Maharashtra, Telangana, Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, Nagaland, Delhi, and Ladakh. So this brings us to the topic of appointment of governor. What's the constitutional provision? What's the process? Appointment of governor is covered under Article 153 of the Constitution. The governor, as you know, functions as the head of the executive at the state, and also as a representative of the central government, forming a link between the center and the state. The President of India is the appointing authority. However, it's not a discretionary power of the President. The appointment is based entirely on the recommendations of the Council of Ministers, headed by the Prime Minister. So the Council of Ministers, headed by the PM, will advise the President, and accordingly, President appoints the governors. Now, the same individual can be appointed as a governor to multiple states as well. That's how the incumbent governor in Kerala has been attached as a governor to Tamil Nadu as well for the interim period. So same governor can look after multiple states. The governor's office is often quite controversial, but when you look at the eligibility criteria, the governor must be a citizen, 35 years of age minimum, should not be a member of either houses of parliament or state legislature. If they are a member, they should resign, and they should not be holding an office of profit. Right? So just go through the basic factual details regarding the provisions of the governor in the constitution and the appointment process per se. Coming to the removal, governor holds the office at the pleasure of the president, meaning the governor can be removed anytime when the central government wants. So if the Council of Ministers advise to the president, then the president can remove the governor or even transfer the governor as well. The governor, of course, can resign. But this is where the controversy comes up. Since the central government has complete control over the appointment and removal process, it's alleged that governors become agents of the center, interfering in state politics, trying to interfere in elections, especially when there is a hung assembly, or especially when there is a defection, right, from a party to another, which could affect the stability of state governments, or even when bills are passed by the state assembly, holding them back deliberately on political grounds. That is where the office of the governor comes into question. And just note down the basic facts regarding the appointment and removal process. Next, on page 4, the Matua community of West Bengal is in the news. This is in the context of the SIR exercise, the special intensive revision, which the Election Commission is carrying out. The Matua community fears that they'll be excluded, and they're demanding for citizenship under the Citizenship Amendment Act. So let's understand who are the Matuas. The Matuas are also considered as the Hindu Namashudras. They are from the scheduled caste. They constitute the second largest SC community in West Bengal. The community was founded by Harichand Thakur in 1860s in the Bengal province that includes today's Bangladesh and West Bengal. So after partition in 1947, the community primarily migrated to West Bengal from East Pakistan. And this migration continued before and after 1971. Right before liberation of Bangladesh, when the tensions were building up, right, when the Hindu community primarily was being targeted by the Pakistani state, a lot of migration happened of the Matuas towards West Bengal. And post the war, after Bangladesh was liberated Even after the war, Matuas migrated towards West Bengal and settled over here. So they are a key part of the social structure in West Bengal and a key electoral constituency as well. One of the largest scheduled caste community, the second largest SE community in West Bengal. Now coming to the next topic. On page 6, there is a protected area in news, which is a very preferred topic by UPSC, the Kappatagudda Wildlife Sanctuary in Karnataka. The Karnataka High Court has basically directed the State Wildlife Board to divert a forest area, a notified forest area, and attach it as part of the protected area under the wildlife sanctuary. That's a development in news, but you should know where exactly this sanctuary is located and its unique features. The Kappatagudda Wildlife Sanctuary is located in the Gadag district of Karnataka. It's in northern part of Karnataka. It's also considered as the Western Ghats of northern Karnataka. The kind of vegetation you find here is primarily dry deciduous forests. The climate is quite arid, very less rainfall, extreme temperatures, and you mainly find dry deciduous forests, grasslands, and scrublands. So the region is home to a very unique history and unique biodiversity. This is a region which was at one time ruled by the Chalukyas and the Rashtrakutas. So there are important places of worship, temples, and intricate carvings and artifacts and archaeological evidence which has been discovered in this region. You also have the Kappatagudda Jain Basdi. It was a primary leading center for Jainism, and you have also have important temples that are located over here with a diverse distribution of flora and fauna. You have leopards, the wolves, particularly the grey wolves, striped hyenas, and other smaller animals, including the Indian civet. Right? So just basic details about such protected areas and the location. Now coming to the last topic for today, related to geography, social issues, and even internal security. So the Hindu has published a detailed article on a large public project in Odisha, which has affected the people, causing large-scale displacement. So it's a example for you to understand how large public projects, though they have a good intention to serve the larger society and economy, they can end up harming and affecting entire regions and groups of people. So this article is referring to the Upper Indravati hydroelectric power project in Odisha. It's located in the Kalahandi district. It's one of the major dams in eastern India. It's a gravity dam built on the Indravati river, which is a tributary of the Godavari. Right? So the upper hydroelectric project located here is one of the largest power producing dams in eastern India. It's one of the largest hydroelectric projects in eastern India. So the construction of this dam and hydroelectric project, though it has brought benefits to other regions with irrigation and electricity, the people around Kalahandi have been very badly affected. The project was launched back in 1978 under Prime Minister Morarji Desai. But despite that, the people in the immediate vicinity, they did not get the immediate benefits. Many villages didn't even have electricity, though this was one of the largest hydroelectric plants in the region, right? And what was worse was that the region got entirely displaced. Many villages had to be moved, and the villagers had to be rehabilitated because of the backwaters created by the dam. And also, several villages in Kalahandi got completely cut off from the rest of mainland. So since there was no connectivity, it continues to affect the movement of people, even for basic necessities like attending school, going to hospitals. So this is affecting the socio-economic development of the region itself. And there's a lot of resentment amongst the people against the project. Now, this reminds me of a similar project. I'll not mention which project, I'll not mention which region as well. In Odisha, there was another similar project, a dam project, which led to one region being cut off, becoming a sort of an island. And the government didn't focus on connectivity, development, and it became a hot spot for Naxal activity and left-wing extremist radicalization. Can you find out which region I'm referring to in Odisha? Right? So please find out which region I'm referring to. Today it's free from Naxalism, but one of the reasons why Naxals could gain a ground in this location was because of the neglect of the government, the poor governance, and the impact of large public projects. Though these mega projects benefit the nation and the state, the local people who get displaced often face the side effects, and they sometimes even don't get justice. So the Indravati project has led to displacement of a large number of villages. Many of them have not received adequate compensation. There's no good connectivity. Entire villages have been cut off by the flooding of the backwaters. So this is the situation which is being highlighted in this article. So with this, I bring my analysis to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session, and if you did, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.